Can I rotate that?
I think if you turn it, it should.
Hold on.
It's all right. We're streaming anyway, so.
It's all right.
Okay, I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Economic Development and Airport Committee for July 21st, 2020 via Zoom. In attendance are Mr. Ivy, Mrs. Earlston, Dr. Fellner as committee members. We have meeting minutes to approve for June 17th, 2020. If there are no corrections or additions, I'd like to hear a motion to approve those.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Mrs.
I'll
Earlston
second,
makes the motion and Mr. Ivy seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
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 The minutes of the June 17th special meeting are approved. Before you, you have agenda. There are two items. Are there any additions to the agenda? If not, I'd like to make a motion, hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Mrs. Earlston makes the motion.
I'll second.
Mr. Ivy seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The agenda is approved as presented. First discussion item is an appointment to the Galleon Port Authority. It's going to take the form of Resolution 2020-12. It's a resolution to approve Mr. John Kleinite as a member of the Board of Directors. Mr. Mayor, do you want to comment on that?
I don't think it's almost one of those cliched individuals that no introduction is necessary, but for those people who aren't familiar, John's been on the school board and the city council. I think it's just a good choice. He is somebody who is experienced at representing others, and I think he'll do a good job there. No, and the group's been meeting regularly, but they've been really one person shy at each meeting. There's been one absent.
And there was Mr. Cochran was not able to fulfill his appointed term, so the vacancy came up.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Any members have any questions or comments? If not, I'd like to hear a motion to take Resolution 2020-12 onto full council Tuesday.
I'll make the motion, Mr. President.
Mr. Ivy makes the motion.
And I'll second it.
Mrs. Earlston seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion to move Resolution 2020-12 onto full council passes. Second item is the Freeze Center update. I asked that this be put on the meeting tonight. Obviously, we have not had a good discussion lately about what is next and how to proceed. And I also think it's appropriate to have it in a finance committee meeting, but here we can, get the ball rolling for the latest update. So I'd like to, we have Port Authority board members here and also members of the that are on the Freeze Fund board. So we've got a variety of input this evening. So can I have maybe Mr. Mayor start the ball rolling?
Yeah, I will simply start by saying that where I think we're at, and that is there's a broad agreement or consensus around a footprint and an overall facility. And that is an arrangement that has an indoor turf court that's soccer sized. And on the other side of the building, separated by a sort of a concourse in the middle, is a set of basketball and volleyball courts. That's the heart of the project, and I think it's 62 or 3,000 square feet, maybe a little bit larger. Where we need to really begin to make some progress, in my view, and narrow down the project is in the area of financing, how we're going to do that. While we know about the size, I think the port's waiting to get an updated estimate that will go along with some work an architect's been doing to develop a design build set of plans that could be qualified proposers then could bid on, if you will, the construction of that. So anyways, we need an update on what this will likely cost, and then narrowing a refining of how we're going to propose to pay for it. So that's really the shortest of updates. I think there's a way to get this built. I think there's a way to reduce any differences in how you would go about funding it, financing, paying cash, or range of options, not a wide range, but a range of options. Still going to cost the same. But I really think that's probably where we're at, Doc, is needing to have an open discussion like you suggested, and have that with Port Authority Council. And Heath's here. I don't think he represents entirely or sitting in the Freeze board, but as you said, he's a representative of that board. So there has to be alignment among those three groups, I think, for sure. So
how do you feel that alignment is best accomplished? In a perfect world.
Well, I think it's best accomplished by continuing to meet the expectations and the needs, the constituencies of the Freeze Foundation that have been established over, I don't know, a decade or more on the scholarship side. So we need to have a meaningful scholarship program. And I also think that the results are pretty clear that the Freeze Foundation has enabled city government to fund some pretty outstanding, as maybe as a delusional term. We've done some good things with that money,
Sure.
and I don't need to list them. And so the key would be to build this large project, but not reduce in any major way the scholarship aspect of the foundation, and also to make sure there's enough money to continue to do new projects around the city, as well as maintain some of these projects that have been built in the last 5 or 6 years. So that's
just to, I promise I will not hold you to speaking for the entire committee, or you know what I'm trying to say. What the mayor just said, funding this project, yet not letting the important other aspects slide. Is that possible?
I think so. I think that the general consensus of the members of the Freeze board is that they're all excited about the project. They understand that the Freeze Foundation will play a significant role in funding it. I think we're open to all of the suggestions from the council, mayor, Gary, weighing all the options, looking at them. I also think that we have our perfect world option that we would like to see go through, but maintain the flexibility that we're listening to everybody's suggestions.
Thank you.
Mr. President, may I ask a question?
Certainly.
Heath, what would you define as the perfect world? If it was, what's the perfect scenario in your world, Heath, from the Freeze perspective?
I don't even know that that's possible, but if we could have our cake and eat it too,
Yeah,
we would probably, the figure that we've been told is $5 million that's needed. If we could have our cake and eat it too, we would like to liquidate $5 million, have it taken care of, continue the scholarship programs as they exist now, and then have the city take a minimal, modest draw for like maybe a 5-year period to allow the fund to get back up to good numbers again. And when I say a modest draw, like what you absolutely have to have for maintenance projects and no new projects. So I guess if we had our cake and we could eat it too, in the perfect world, we'd say, here's the $5 million, make this facility happen. We're glad that you can do it debt-free. And please, for about a 5-year period, take minimal draws, let us maintain the scholarships, and let's see where this fund's back at in 5 years. Maybe instead of at 5 million, we're at 8 or 9 million. You know, we've looked at the law of 7-2, where if we didn't touch it at all in 7 years, we'd probably be right back to where we're at right now. But we also understand that you can't function by not touching it at all. You're going to have, at the very minimum, some small maintenance projects, and nobody wants to take anything away from the scholarships. And I don't think we have to. No matter what you decide, we're not going to have to harm the scholarships.
And if I could, the scholarships are roughly between, I think the mayor discussed it, $60,000 to $70,000 a year. And if I'm not mistaken, those are a given in this entire equation. That those scholarships are not going to be touched in any way, shape, or form. Is that correct?
I don't know what,
I wouldn't say it's a given.
67,000 a year. Is that what we give out a year in scholarships?
There's actually been talk over the past few years of the Freeze scholarships amongst the Freeze Foundation, wondering if we maybe give too much based upon our student enrollment now compared to what we've done over the years. So there's some flexibility there. But no matter what you guys decide, no matter what the mayor decides, no matter what council decides, even if we liquidated 2 million or 5 million, we're not going to have to end the scholarships.
That's
There's no
what
reason
I
to
was
do that.
most. Thank you. That's good to hear. Okay, great.
Doc, may I enter in?
Certainly.
Yeah, there's some baseline stuff that everyone needs to read. And this is going to be driven by people's opinions and desires. And I don't want to, I'm pretty passionate about this. I don't want to heat it up, but this idea about preserving the scholarship and all those things, there's nothing in the probate that sets up the Freeze Trust that would guarantee that. What it says is that the foundation's annual income will be divided by 8s, 7/8 going to the city for park and recreation, and 1/8 going to Galleon students for scholarships. So it's possible what Heath and Aaron were saying, it's possible in discussion in the Freeze Foundation, it'd have to go through a change in probate. And I suspect that because the document was entered into by the city and by the Freeze trustees, that document would have to be sort of jointly negotiated. So anyways, the other thing I wanted to ask Heath, if I could, Doc, was if he was offering his opinion or if there's some vote among the Freeze Foundation board members that they are encouraging the partial liquidation of the fund, or is that kind of what you described as your cake and eat it too?
Well, I think what happened when we met with Key Bank a long time ago about the account, we sat in the room and we talked about ideas of small liquidation. We talked about an annual payment towards debt from the Freeze Foundation. And the numbers were coming back really bad. Basically, at that point in time, the conversations was like, okay, if there's debt on this building, we may be tying up the whole $450,000, $500,000 a year paying the debt on this building. And then I'll take the credit for it because I was the guy that was sitting in the room. And I said, well, what if we just liquidated $5 million and didn't touch the account for 5 or 6 years? And Key Bank came back with the numbers for us, and it was actually kind of astounding. So what we were looking at, and what my argument was with the rest of the foundation, was we all like these projects that our city's doing with Freeze money. Would you like to tie up Freeze money for 20, 30 years? Or would you like to just tie it up for like 5 years and show some restraint and build that account back up so we're doing the projects again? And that's where this all came from. But Tom's exactly right about the 1/8. And he brings up an excellent point there, because no matter what we liquidate, 2 million or 5 million, if we stick with the current program, it's not going to eliminate the scholarships, but it would reduce the amount that they would get for them. I can tell you, though, that there's been a very aggressive internal talk within the Freeze that we may be giving out too much in scholarships now. And that's just opinion based. But we've been giving out the same amount of scholarships regardless of student enrollment. And there's even been times when money's been turned back in. So I think the current Freeze Foundation, although we love the scholarships, especially Bill Stepro, who administers those, we're also looking at the projects you're doing and the validity of the economic development with it, and saying, you know, we can still keep scholarships even if it's not as aggressive as it was. So
Okay.
the cake you eat it too part is help us build it back up by not, you know.
There's about another, I don't know, half hour or so, Doc, conversation about the scholarships. I'm not really sure how to quite get into it, but they're multiple year scholarships. There's also been a need over the years in maintaining the scholarship program for the Freeze Foundation to vote extra money so that commitments that were made, these are 4-year scholarships for the most part. And when there's say 70,000 for distribution, a portion of that goes to, in this case, 2020 graduates, but there's also of that 2020 allocation, there's money for sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And so what you see as the necessary cash each year to fund the scholarship commitments, that's where shrinking the pool of funds, that if you make that 1/8 smaller, then you're going to run into cash issues, particularly if you've taken half the money from the foundation and built an activity center with it. You're not going to have much money to make up those what would be shortfalls. Heath's right. There are times that a scholar does not need the money, or a scholar doesn't complete their undergraduate degree. But most of the time, it's the need has been for the foundation to put extra money in to make good on their prior year commitments. So if, for instance, you shrink the 70,000 to 35,000, you're going to have real challenges continuing your commitment to collegiate upperclassmen, as well as you won't have to shrink the program, Heath. There won't be any money to offer it out.
Are you sure it's done that way?
One of the strongest things within Galleon City Schools, one of the scholarships that all of the scholars vie for, and you shrink it unintentionally to a point that you go from maybe funding people who don't have high academic achievements. I'm not sure if that's true, but you're going to reduce for sure the amount of money available over the next 5 or 6 years for the scholarship portion of that.
Yeah, and I apologize for
a long time. And pardon me.
I was going to say, I apologize for my ignorance on that, because I
What?
know that when we look at the paperwork and we do the annual distribution, we've looked at the financial reports and we look at everything that's going out. And I've really never seen it in the paperwork where we're sending out, like we allocate $65,000 this year. I've not seen it in the balance sheets where we're giving out money from the previous 3 years. So it's interesting. I'll pull up the numbers when I look at it later, because I know that like usually that number is around 65,000. And when you look at our balance sheet and all the financials, you don't really see, or at least I've never seen on there, where there's 65,000 this year and 65,000 from the previous year and another 65,000 from 2 years ago. So I'm not quite understanding how that works, because I would have thought that in all of our going over those numbers, I mean, that'd be significant. That would be in a 4-year period, could be $250,000.
Yeah, the
I haven't really
accruals
seen
are,
that.
yeah. I think it's just an important aspect. I think that the goal of building the Freeze Center is to have something that is good in and of itself, and it's also something that is a source of community pride and demonstrates growth and has an attraction mechanism. I don't think there's anyone who would argue that the free scholarships haven't been serving that purpose for a while. And so you use that cake and eat it too analogy. This isn't cake we're eating. This is meat and potatoes for those families who get these scholarships in this community. So we're talking about risking some of the money for that meat and potatoes, if you will, for more cake. So I think there's some caution there. I'm of the opinion that you can do this without depleting the fund, but I don't want to get ahead of, of the.
I have a question about the money that's pulled annually. I was always under the impression about 5%. And in the hiring of Michael DePerna, which Tom and I spoke with Mr. DePerna and early on put together in the analysis that I think I've shared with you guys in the past. When you pull 5.14%, I was under the impression that covered what went to city projects, went to scholarships, and the analysis that he did kept that at 65,000. So, and then he show if you liquidate or if you borrow some, or if you fully use debt and use the portion of the 5.14% to pay the debt, it all mathematically works out that 65,000 is the annual number for scholarship. So I'm a little confused like Heath on what that explanation of multiple years at 65,000. That's new information that never showed up on his reports.
I'd like to interject and ask Ms. Earlston or Mr. Ivy if either one of you would want to step forward and get together with Mr. Watkins to kind of clear up that bit of an issue.
Absolutely.
After he looks into it and get back with us and let us know, kind of thing?
Well, I had more of the idea of not waiting for another committee meeting, rather, give Mr. Watkins some time, or Ms. Coons, another board member and banker, to come up with some information and have either you or Mr. Ivy kind of meet privately and then present it.
Sure, yeah.
I mean,
Either one of us
Of
can do
course.
that.
Or both, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm looking for a volunteer.
I'll
Yeah.
volunteer. Either
Okay.
way.
So I think there's multiple issues here. Obviously, the financing is a big one, and that would be great, Aaron. You don't have a deadline, but it'll also give you some understanding on the project and how the freeze fund works and things like that.
Can I just add one thing quickly? I don't
Certainly.
want to confuse of these couple of issues. If you reduce the amount of money without changing the probate, then there's no mechanism to get that up to 65,000. Now, what Gary's talking about is over a year ago, there was conversation about how you could hold the school harmless, and then what entity had to suck it up, if you will. It's really not a very graceful term. But the way that would happen likely is that there would be if the 1/8 became 35,000 by reducing the endowment by 5 million. And these are all terms or all numbers with a lot of zeros in them. But if you did that, you would reduce what would be available for free scholarships, probably in the range of 35 to 40,000. And it is in that scenario that you're going to have trouble making those out-year commitments.
Well, there's another thing that I forgot. We've had situations in the past where that like kind of our magic number was 65,000 with scholarships. And we had a situation where the number was less than that. And with the super majority vote, we can override that 1/8 and do it. Just like, for example, the endowment to the city is not $5 million, but we can override that with the super majority and make it $5 million. And it's the same thing, because I had forgotten, we ran into that one year with the scholarships of where I think the money that was available was a little bit less than 60,000, but at the time it wasn't Bill Stepro, it was
Linda Schieffer.
Linda Schaefer, and she was working on it, and she had already planned for 65,000. So what we had to do was vote on it. We had the super majority, and she still got the 65,000. So I
Yeah,
think
so if
that's
you did that, Keith, if you did that, you've reduced the principal. That's how, let's say you got 9 million, you reduce to 4.5 million. That'll reduce that amount. Then if you use that super majority that's in your rules to add extra money, then I would worry about chipping away at the endowment size in order to make good on these commitments to worthy students.
and that's legitimate. But what I was saying is we don't have to go to probate like you were suggesting. We can just do a super majority.
But we'd probably end up in probate if the Freeze Foundation started arbitrarily super majority. That'd be, I don't think we want to go there, to be quite honest, man. I can't even believe I'm hearing that, but let's just go on. So what you're saying to the city is like, well, it really doesn't matter. We'll just vote a super majority. Is that, that's not what you mean.
Well, no, that's not what I mean at all. What I'm saying is, like, if you come to us and you want $2 million, we're going to have a super majority vote to do that. I'm talking
Right.
about the same exact thing.
Yeah. I
have a
Yeah.
question, Mr. President, if I could, please.
Certainly.
It seems like we're discussing possibly two different funding options here. And my first question, would be to Mr. Frankhouse, is that if we liquidate the entire $5 million through the work that the port and the Freeze have done, where are we at as far as securing, the other possibly $4 million that we need, whether it be through donations, grants, naming rights, et cetera? Where do we currently stand on that? If you could give us a brief review. It's been 6 months or more.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I want to take a step back before I answer your question. I got a chance to listen to Tom last night, and I want to thank him because I love this comment about progress forward. Just the things that Mayor O'Leary as the leader and council behind him, from Hesby Drive to the Portland Way South widening to different developments along 598, from sleep-in discussion to Bell stores to Arby's to the Carter crossings to Ralphie's coming to town. All that is that progress forward. And I hope that continues to be our focus, because that's really why the Freeze Center even started into this conversation, because I think it gives us a story to tell as we look to encourage outside growth, or those within our community to grow here rather than outside. And I loved what he said when he mentioned there's 4 options. The first one is do nothing, which isn't an option. He said that. And so I thank him for that. The other one was to liquidate. Another one was to finance it all. And the other one was a mix. And, I want to be a part of that discussion. I have my own opinions, but at the same time, the key is we get it done. So, and because that's that progress forward. And from an economic development standpoint, that's what this whole discussion started upon. I mean, this industry, the travel sports, is a 9.8 billion. It's only growing. I mean, if you've seen anything come back after this COVID, it's been travel sports. I mean, you've seen that with baseball and AAU basketball. I mean, they're out there and they're moving forward. I mean, high school sports is shut down, but travel sports isn't. So, I hope we can come to a financing solution. But as I think about this project, we hired the criteria architect. We've finalized the design. We're going to get those estimates that Tom talked about. I think the project got better from talking to them. I shared with them from the very beginning that we weren't paying more than $8 million to build this thing, because otherwise it can't happen. I mean, we knew that. And we had some estimates before we went this criteria route. So I pray that that's where they come back at, because that's what it's going to need to be. And I have confidence and hopeful that that does happen. So if we think in terms of, Mayor said 6 to 7 last night, I think it's more like 7 to 8 myself. I hope it's closer to his estimates, but that's what even the original estimates before the wreck, you know, we were talking about 8. So I'm going to talk about 8. So that's why we've been talking about 5 from the freeze. As you remember from last year, we have the Timken Foundation involved at 200,000. We have the state capital bill money that we did secure in June for 500,000. And then we have the Community Foundation for Crawford County in there at 500,000. We have a donor that wishes to remain silent, but upon the freeze support, they're putting in 100,000. So that's 1.2. That gets us to 6.2. I've talked to a group called Side Effects. They go out and raise money for complexes. I don't want to use them for this, but through discussions with them, they're based out of the Dayton area. I believe there's $1 million of sponsorship, because in addition to the naming rights of the center as the Freeze Center, you've got $500,000 on the hard court side. You got $500,000 on the pitch side. Could be an individual, could be a corporation, could be a healthcare provider that is going to fill that. Could be a 5 to 10 year commitment for each of those 500,000s, because you'll have 500,000 on the hard court, 500,000 on the turf. That gets you your $1 million. So right there, you're at 7.2. And then you got to finish that 0.8 out with the Side Effects group. I mean, there's all kinds of sponsorships, from scoreboards to hoops, and almost 800,000 becomes minimal in their mind. They think that's very achievable. But even then, I mean, we have, you know, the 0.11 income tax. So you're to 8 million. And this thing can go. I mean, it could start, we want to start on the base of the project, because we have the 500,000 state capital bill dollars that we've already used some of it for the tree clearing, for the geotech, which is, they were out there this past week. I think they did 9 drills, 30 feet deep, and to make sure of where we can place the facility, so we can get that information to the criteria architects, so that when they put this out for RFQ, where contractors will put in their information to be a potential builder of this, which is then followed up after we see those RFQs with an RFP, which is a request for proposal. Then we know the number for sure. The 8 million is confirmed, or it's what I think is going to be hopefully a little bit less, more towards Tom's number. But yeah, I do feel confident, Aaron.
Very good. Mr. President, I did write these questions down. If you could indulge me, please. I'll be
Sure.
very brief as I can. Gary, how many businesses have opened in the community, let's say in the past 5 years or so, based upon the promise that we were going to be able to get this thing done? And in your opinion, you know, what are we looking at in the future? I mean, as far as economic development, I'm not even talking about the industrial plants for 61 and 30 in the future. I'm talking about just new rooftops, retail businesses out on the 598 30. But more importantly, what kind of people are we going to get to town and businesses if we don't get this thing done?
Well, the only word I want to correct there is we've never made a promise. Because
Hopes. How's that? Hopes.
we've talked about a vision for sure. I mean, we've been working on this since October of 14. I mean, Tom and I sat in the Community Foundation office, and we've hired multiple groups to do feasibility. So we've always talked about a vision, and I've already mentioned several of them. You know, when I opened up, from, you know, the Carter Crossing to even Ralphie's when they were considering purchasing, to I had a specific conversation with Arby's early on, because they're owned out of Bucyrus, and I know the McGuires, and he's like, no, Galleon's red. Our real estate group is not going to go there. And I started sharing the vision, and all of a sudden, at least turned to yellow, because they built it, you know, and that was a nice investment. The Sleep Inn always knew our vision. In fact, they wanted to build bigger, but the bank wouldn't let them. But at the same time, you know, what's coming? I think there's a SFA report that talks about the number of weekends that are going to utilize this. And it starts pretty conservatively. It's only 26 weekends that generate all the pro formas of what they have in here. And you're looking at 26 weekends with large, medium, and small events. And it calls anywhere from a large event needing 500 beds on a Friday night and Saturday night to 250 on a medium and 100 on a small. Now, we only have 62 beds out there. So that instantly gives credibility for more hotels. And I think once you start building this, just the trees coming down and some of the drillings that have happened have created conversation. But that's when the restaurant comes. Some of the leakage that Tom talks about starts getting minimized. But also, in all due respect, I mean, some of that leakage is good for this entire region. So it helps us all. And there needs to be some plan. Some of the capital raising needs to involve our commissioners. They need to be involved in this. And we hired Michael DePerna, and he's recognized that. And I struck up a conversation with one of the commissioners and said, we need to sit down and talk. You guys need to be a part of this. I'm going to use an example out of Westfield, Indiana, which is Grand Park, which our venue is not going to be anywhere near that. And let me kind of set that up because there's small, medium, and large business. Large business is 100 million plus, and medium is 10 million to 100 million, and small is 10 million and less. I want our venue to be kind of in that small to medium range, because the way travel sports works, because I've been doing this for 10 years now, is that as a coach, you select venues that you're going to go to every year consistently. Then you select a venue that you're going to rotate to every 5 years. And that's those big guys. That's the Sports Force up at Cedar Point. It's the Westfield, Indiana, that I'm going to give you some numbers for here in a minute. It's Elizabethtown, Kentucky. It's Georgia, where they built a monster complex. But you only do that once a year, and then I want our venue to be one that's annually on every team's schedule. It's affordable. It's a great customer experience. They want to come back. And in the design that we've been talking about with the criteria architect has included that at all conversations. You know, how do we have proper seating, both up in a mezzanine, maybe on the floor? So with that having been said, I think there's tremendous opportunity for additional businesses to come in because we're going to warrant it. But this Westfield complex, which is big business, okay? So ultimately, I'm going to share some numbers, but then I'm going to use 10% of those numbers. So I have their numbers from the first 2.5 years. They opened in the summer, and then I have the first 2 full years. And they talk about 3 things. They talk about visitor spending. They talk about economic impact, which is the things that are built because of it. And then they talk about sales and income tax. And in the 2.5 year, I mean, they have visitor spending at 104 million. They have economic impact of 160 million, and they have sales and income tax at 8.3 million. So that's way bigger than us. I'm not claiming those numbers, but if we just use 10% of them in that 2.5 year, you're talking about 830,000 of income tax and sales tax. So I think that gives us some concept. So just like we hired groups to do pro formas, I mean, this is all they're doing. They're using projections off of existing numbers to come up with that expectation. So I mean, when we're talking about 5 million, shoot, we can take 800,000 and do some math, and you can cover that 5 million pretty quick. And that's just based on, 10%. Who's not to say we're at 15 or 20% of that, because we've done it right. And we're in a fabulous place, because you go back to the initial study from Don Schumacher and the National Association of Sports Commission. He said, without a doubt, you have tremendous logistics regionally, but also interstate for people to get here. So is that a good answer?
Fantastic. Yes. Thank you very much. I think that's pretty much all the questions. Gary, you pretty much tied in a couple of the questions that I had in your answer. Mr. President, thank you. Thank you for the time.
Certainly.
Hey, Tom, could I ask a question or two about the income tax?
Sure, go ahead.
There was a lot of information that you just went through. What
Yeah.
did you say the income tax would be at?
Well, it was sales and income, Tom. And if I'm not saying it's going to be that, but if we're saying we're 10% of what Westfield is, it was 830,000.
Yeah, I would, without knowing, my somewhat educated guess would be that's largely weighted to sales tax over income tax. So in that case, I agree with part of your presentation about the need to have the commissioners involved.
Yeah.
They, in terms of tax-based growth, the county government will perhaps be the biggest beneficiary. But
Well, other than economic development that happens right here with the new restaurants and, I heard discussion about grocery stores. I mean, to me, I have the emails that show 3-minute, 5-minute, 10-minute, and you got to do 150,000 a week. And we don't warrant it with our rooftops.
who are we
And-
talking about? Grocery stores now?
Yes.
You've been
So-
hanging out with the silly Irishman too much. You're jumping from one topic to another. I do
Well,
not
but
want to go there.
We let
I'll
capitalism
have a
answer
very
that with this
robust and
decision.
intelligent discussion with you about grocery store, but has nothing to do with what I'm trying to get at tonight.
I'm just
Actually, I
saying
think
that.
it does.
know
I
that's
think
im-
he's trying to prove a point.
I think that's
What's
important.
that, Aaron? Excuse me? Excuse
I
me?
said, I think he's just trying to use the grocery stores to emphasize a point based on the discussion, just to just finalize what he was saying.
The
based
point
on the
is
free
what
center.
then? What's the point he was trying to make?
So it's
Go
always
ahead,
about
Gary. Thank you.
it's always about rooftops, and we've seen our population decline, and it's going to take a while to add rooftops with houses. I mean, I think that's an important initiative of support. I think Chad can speak to that. But in the meantime, if we have a temporary influx with, car rooftops, it's a
Yeah.
pretty good story to tell when you've got 25,000 people coming, and they're going to need Gatorade, and they're going to need ice, and they're going to need food. So it's a way to craft a story that helps the economic development initiative that I agree with Tom. We need one, but I think capitalism is going to figure it out based on us making these great decisions about sports complexes, which are quality of place and image, and whether it's even the bike trail, and that's bringing people here. The playground in the park does that, and this is just added benefit because every time someone comes to the sports complex, a day trip's about $26 and some odd cents, and overnight stays $95 and some odd cents per SFA. And it grows because of, yes, hotel, but also they're buying more in our community, whether it's restaurants, groceries, and some of those things. So I think we start answering some of those questions that I agree with you, Tom, because you talked about that the other night. It's important. It is important. And I think this helps that cause.
Okay, when if you aren't aware of this, then you haven't on the grocery store, then you haven't been paying attention. We don't have a grocery store in Galleon West for one reason. For one reason, that's the owner of that shopping center. And if you don't know the detail of it, come up and see me. I'll explain that. The rooftops warrant, we had a liquor permit issued to a business, and it fell apart, not because of rooftops, not because of the sports complex or not. It fell apart largely because of the landlord, if you ask me. So I really, Doc, I don't mean.
Well, hey,
Talk
Tom,
about the grocery store. I continue to be to work at that as much as anyone, I think, that's trying to make that happen. So
I agree.
wanna go
Hey,
back to
Tom.
something else, please.
Tom, I'm going to interrupt you. I understand that the grocery store is a major topic, and it's a touchy topic, and it has a lot of information that people don't know. I agree with you. I don't believe it's the topic for discussion this evening. And I'd like to think that Gary wasn't kind of pounding his chest to say that the sports complex will pave the way for that. So I would like to drop the grocery store implication or specifics for tonight.
I'm with that. I 100% agree.
I do have a question for you. Let's say that the city was asked to fund $2 million of this project, that all other resources, that the Freeze said, okay, we'll give you 4 million. And with Gary's assessment, I did a little quick math in my head and said that there's probably $1 million for sure. So let's say we were asked to come up with a couple million ourselves because everything else fell through. Nobody wanted to write the check for $100,000 for 5 years. What's the financing strategy with that scenario? In your opinion?
Are you asking me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I wouldn't, that 6 million, see, I would, to start with, I would say that anything that comes from the Freeze Foundation, it comes through the city.
Right.
The trust is to keep the city from doing something wayward. Their authority is relatively limited. We are the beneficiaries of the will. So when you say Freeze would give 4 and the city would give, what I would rephrase that by saying the city would provide $6 million.
Okay.
Okay. I think that's a lot more than what I thought the project could start. And I realize we've been talking about it for a handful of years now. But I would recommend this, and I outlined it on Monday. I believe that the best way for the balancing of interest, the best way to preserve the endowment as close to its current value, potentially appreciate slightly, but certainly not decline dramatically, is to have some of the debt that would be issued to construct this facility, have some of that debt purchased by the Freeze Foundation. And that I would then approach financial institutions, or as Gary's outlining, other significant corporate donors to purchase. Chad better help me, because I was going to use the word chunk to describe a chunk of debt, and a tranche maybe. I would then go out and attempt to sell city-backed bonds for the difference. So I would have the Freeze Foundation buy 3 of it, buy $3 million worth of debt. They get a lower rate of return, but they wouldn't dissipate the principal of the endowment. And then I would look for local financial institutions or investors to buy pieces of the remaining $2 million of debt, likely in $100,000 or $200,000 increments. So that's how I would suggest that the $6 million is raised. And when I said the foundation could buy $3 million of debt, they could buy $4 million of debt. I think we all realize that their annual earnings, if they're buying muni debt rather than being invested in the stock market, it's likely to be a % or 2 less. But they would still be able to sort of plug away at what I think is going to be a rock solid municipal debt issuance. I think it's almost certain that this debt will be paid off. And if you were a buyer of it, local bank, area bank, community bank, or the foundation, this is a pretty solid investment in the community. And I think between Gallion's taxing sources, our own resources, and the earning power of the foundation, that's a pretty good debt stream for an investor to buy into. So that's my answer. I hope it's
Sure. Oh, well,
nice enough and sensible enough. It is a little complicated,
sure.
but it has far less, I think, unintended effects than if you liquidate and see what happens.
I'm going to call Chad in to sort of weigh in again, not an opinion that we will hold you to in a court of law, either as a banker or as a member of the Port Authority. But, you know, the mayor used some terms there that myself included went right over my head. So, you know, weigh in.
Yeah. So, you know, we were asked to present a couple different options, and I think obviously we're all aware of option 1 is the liquidation piece. I think that in my mind, and I talked to Gary about this earlier, you know, if we go with the liquidation route, we're really looking at the city, to Tom's point, because it's all money that the city would have to use. So we're looking at the city to get the center built. And then we're going to go ask the county to pony up for the operations for the first 5 years until, we're at that break even point, because they're the main beneficiary from the sales tax and all that. The second option is really the financing. So what would happen here is the Port Authority would issue bonds. They'd issue municipal bonds for purchase. We have the authority to do that. The only issue we have there is we don't have anything to pay those bonds back with. So the city would have to guarantee that debt, basically. Talking to our legal counsel this morning, basically there would be 3 items that'd be pledged. Obviously, there'd be more than likely a mortgage on the facility itself. So if the bond debt was not paid, the owner of the bonds could basically foreclose and it's now theirs. The second would be any net operating income that the facility does generate. Our pro formas really have us at year 4 to 5 before we start actually breaking even. So that's really kind of negligent as well. And then the third is the guarantee of the city. Now the city's going to have to, and our attorney made a very distinct or a very a point to be distinctive here. The city has to pledge non-tax revenue. They cannot pledge tax revenue to guarantee our debt. So it has to be other sources of income. For example, the draw they're taking off the freeze every year. So there is going to be some significant costs. In my mind, best case scenario, you're looking at adding an additional $3 million to the total cost of the facility by financing it. The $5 million, let's say we borrow $5 million. In my mind, the best case scenario is about $2.5 to $2.75 million in interest over a 20-year term. In addition to that, bond counsel, municipal advisor. If we have to sell the debt publicly, we're going to have to get a financial advisor, like a bank, involved. You're talking anywhere between $125,000 to $250,000 to $300,000 just in cost to issue the debt. There is some savings there if we can find enough sources to privately place the debt. So in other words, if the Freeze Foundation says, okay, we're gonna do $4 million, you got to find another $1 million, then we could find other banks or other individuals who are going to give the rest. If we don't have to sell these bonds through a financial advisor, there would be some cost savings there, but you're still probably looking at $125,000 to $150,000 in cost for the debt issuance itself, in addition to those interest costs. I think that
That's
from
pretty
talking to
typical what we pay when we're going to borrow $3.5 million, or we did last meeting. You look at the costs that we paid Squires, Patton and Boggs. That's pretty typical to prepare that kind of document. And Chad, I'm sorry for interrupting. I absolutely am suggesting a private sale.
Yeah, okay.
I think you have to go out and get that thing, get the issue rated. That's a very expensive cost, not very big issue. So yeah, I'm talking about private placement, a guarantee that the debt that's issued, institutions or individual investors say, yeah, I'll buy that.
And I think either way is possible. The big question our advisors have had is what kind of rate we're going to get here. So, we've talked to multiple municipal advisors on this issue, and we're getting estimates anywhere from 3% to 7%. Is what our the rate is that we're going to be issuing these bonds at. And obviously that has a tremendous amount of difference in the overall cost and the overall feasibility of the city guaranteeing this debt. So, I think either way is possible. I don't know the final numbers. Unfortunately, my fear is to get to that second scenario where we're borrowing money. We're going to probably $75,000 to $100,000 just to find out how much it's going to cost us. Because I don't know how we're going to get final numbers until we start actually finding the buyers for these bonds. And I guess that would be up to the mayor to tell us where that money to pay that debt's going to come from.
Well, I don't think, if I might, Doc, I don't think that's real complicated. I think you go to the freeze board and you say, will what is your tolerance to direct your financial advisor to buy a certain amount at 3%. I would never issue at 7%. I think that's right. And I don't know what the context of the question was, the financial advisor, but nobody would suggest saying 7%. If it's 7%, I probably all of a sudden have to pull up the no build option, because that's ridiculous. I don't think you would go to local financial institutions or local investors and be willing to pay 7%. They're not getting 7% anywhere else. They're not getting 7%. So a last comment, I don't believe that interest, when you take that 2 million.
We're talking about 20-year
Pardon me?
bonds here.
What about 20 years? I'm sorry. I missed the last comment. I apologize.
I
But
think it was
but
Chad.
it's about $100,000 a year in interest that you'd incur if you did a 20-year bond. So that's that. I mean, I know that when you say $2 million in interest, that's kind of off-putting, but you'd be surprised at how much interest everyone is paying on their houses. And it's certainly, it's pretty significant over that 30-year period. It's the same sort of issue. So. But anyway, I would absolutely agree that you have to pre-sale this, so that the uncertainty that if you issued a note, if the bank started calling their usual suspects, you're going to get quotes that no one is going to want to fund. So.
Mr. President, do we know the current balance in the freeze account as of the most recent reporting day?
That would be are you
Heath,
talking
no.
about in the city?
In the freeze account, in the freeze account right now, is it 9 million, 10 million? Is it approaching 11 million?
Mr. Watkins would have that answer. I do not.
The last I saw it was over 9 million and climbing. I'm sorry, Aaron, I don't have the recent report. I mean, I can get a hold of Key Bank and find out exactly where it's at. But it had gained, it was gaining, and I believe the number that we were given at the time was 17%. It was recovering really nice. But, we took a really hard hit when COVID-19 first struck, and now it's starting to gain some momentum to the positive.
And that's kind of why I asked the question. And forgive me, Mr. President, I praise God that this thing wasn't built and up and running last year. And if we'd had a note on it, where would we be today if we had borrowed $2 to $3 million and it was constructed a year ago, and then we had this pandemic? I mean, I'm sorry. If we are in a position to be able to liquidate the entire 5 million, and like he said, meat and potatoes, like the mayor said, Heath is talking about cake and getting the scholarships out. I mean, I don't know how much support I could have on taking out a mortgage on something. And, especially if we have an opportunity to liquidate the 5 million, have several million still in there, modify our projects over the next several years, which we would do responsibly, and we would own it outright. God forbid we have another pandemic in an empty building. We would still own it.
Okay, Aaron, the only issue I have with that analysis is that the scholarships. Okay, so let's say it is 9 million now. You take half of it, you get 4.5. That leaves the advocates of cash looking for another 500,000. But let's just say it's a 9 and 5 goes in cash. You have 4 million, and you lose like they lost. Then you're going to shrink the income coming off of that. The endowment will go from around 9 million to 3 million. And then
I understand.
Pardon me?
I understand.
Okay. Well, it seems to me and I want to do one more thing, Doc. I know this is going long, but I encourage everybody who's going to vote on this. There is, oh gosh, Gary's probably got 2 inches of materials. I'm looking at 1.5 inches of stuff. Y'all really ought to read all of it. Y'all ought to read the Schumacher reports, the first 2. You ought to read all the analysis, because this is certainly the most studied project that I've been involved in 40 years. So there's been a lot of research on it. And there's more than a little irony. I've got a sense of humor about this, I want you to know, but it's funny for one of the people whose original idea it was, because there's a handful of folks who started talking and thinking about this. It is somewhat ironic that I'm put in the position of having to play a bit of a devil's advocate. That we've come so far, I think we've lost a little bit of our bearings on this, that this project has clouded out other community priorities. So having said that, I think it's real important that you read the studies. One of the things that Schumacher said way back when, and this is when it was a countywide effort, actually, if you look at who bought into the first study, City of Galion was only a partial player, partnership, there were other entities, more of a countywide basis. The emphasis then was very much on it being a regional facility for Crawford County, Galion area youth. And in all the explanation that Gary offered, which is a strong explanation about the commercial side of this, I think we've missed that portion of it. I think that's the best reason for doing it. If all we're doing is to have 26 tournaments so kids stay in Ontario and eat in Ontario restaurants, it's really kind of nice to have it and feel good to be part of the project, but the economic development benefits will not be as significant. Where I think our benefit and where you have an opportunity to make headway with the commissioners, I wish you luck. But where you would have maybe some traction with them is that if you showed in the plan that progressively kids from all over the county were going to have access to something that they didn't have now. So as you're working on making that case to the commissioners, I think that's real important to reemphasize that. So I appreciate being allowed to say that. And I think it's important for everybody to look at the studies and see how they progressively went from a community facility meeting a gap that wasn't being met into more of a commercial facility that will generate business income and jobs and tax revenue and those sorts of things. So I think to vote on any of these ideas until you've read everything would be, I think it won't take you that much time and you'll, I think, really benefit from the context. So thanks, Todd.
What I agree with you. And that's one of the reasons, going back, that I kind of conned Mr. Ivy into volunteering so that he can talk with Heath to get, the scenario that he suggested, get some more information on that for us as well as for himself. And there's no vote forthcoming. This is again trying to, and I know some of the issues that we've talked about tonight, if not everyone, have been discussed in the past, but it's been a long time. I felt like it was time to revisit ideas and issues. And I think that being on Facebook Live gives a wider audience than just a committee meeting at the whole. I'm not sure what kind of questions we're going to answer this evening, but I know that it will generate a lot of conversation, phone calls, emails, things like that. So I feel like in that regard, this is a good meeting, a big advantage for us. I'm gonna, Ms. Earlston, do you have anything? Does anybody else have anything that they want to ask? Because I know that, again, in my mind, this is another small step discussion, nothing finalized this evening. So if there aren't any, I'm going to ask if there's any other business. If not, then the next meeting.
August 18th,
Say again?
August 18th.
Oh, and okay. Yes, and certainly. As July 21st is today.
Yeah,
All
whoops.
right, August 18th at 7 o'clock, and we will Zoom until further notice. Do I have a motion for adjournment?
I'll make the motion.
Mr. Ivy makes the motion,
And I'll second it.
seconded by Ms. Earlston. All in favor?
Hi,
Bye.
Meeting adjourned at 8:07. Thank you very much, everyone.
thank you.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Thank you.